Good evening, friends. The sun is set, and I'm back with another tale from my collection. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the night with a story I call Resolute. Moving forward is for the most part easy to do once you make up your mind to do it. Standing at the side of the road in the misty dawn, he looked at the uprooted trees and overturned soil, knowing he had been here before, despite having only just arrived. The old familiar pain in his shoulder flared from deep within as he shifted the straps of his pack, and his mind flashed back to a night many years before. The night before everything changed the way he saw the world. As the bus rolled to a stop, he grabbed his pack and stood in the aisle. He was eager to get out of the cold and into the nice warm room where he could get a hot meal and rest. Shouldering the pack, he grinned at his newfound companions as they began to move down the aisle to the exit. They seemed lost in conversation, and while he nodded in agreement at the proper intervals, he was lost in thoughts of events to come, filled with anticipation. Looking back, he was sure that conversation was actually quite important. Yet, even now, many years later, he could only recall bits and pieces what they were talking about. The fact that knowing bits he did remember saved his life, reaffirmed the importance. He stepped from the bus, hearing the gravel and ice crunch below his boots, and pulled his collar tight against the chill wind. Wisps of smoke whipped the air like dust thrown up from a landing chopper, momentarily obscuring the building before him. Watching as the others faded into darkness as they moved toward the building, he waited for his companions and fell in beside them as they also moved toward the promised warmth of the inn. "So you fellows want to share a room and split the cost?" he asked. He had plenty of money, but it never hurt to save where he could, as it made more available later. "Sure, as long as they have a room with 3 beds," one of them remarked, "'cause I ain't sharing a bunk with either of you hombres." He laughed at this as he ascended the steps into the warmth of the inn and the welcome relief from the cold. He had been chilled from the moment he stepped off the plane and entered the bus. Despite the many men accompanying him, their body heat was insufficient to warm the bus, which seemed to have no heater. "Gentlemen, please check your weapons at the arms room before proceeding to register at the desk. We have a fine hot meal and comfortable rooms waiting for you," an elderly black man said above the rising murmur of disapproval from the men. "I know you like to keep your weapons handy, but you won't need them here, and the ladies always complain of gun oil on the linens." This drew a few laughs, and several left some polite remarks about what the ladies could find on the linens. But they complied, and lined up at the desk to check in their weapons. Stepping to the counter, he laid his rifle down gently and gave the clerk his name as he watched the man write the particulars in a book. Unlike many of the others, he retained his backpack. He would not be seen without the pack, as it contained everything he needed for life when he was away from home. He was given a claim check and turned to get his room key. "Sir, I'll have to ask for your knife as well, the clerk said, pointing to the scabbard on his hip. He looked down as if considering to refuse, but quickly undid his belt and slipped the knife from it. He did not want to surrender it any more than he had his rifle, but he knew there was another in his pack, along with his sidearm and magazines of extra ammunition for both weapons. By the time he finished closing his belt, the clerk was handing him another claim check and laying his knife with his rifle for the other man, who was steadily storing weapons in the cage room behind him. Turning to find his companions, he saw they were already through the line at the check desk and waiting for him. He made his way through the crowd of men to where they stood near the stairs. "So what are the accommodations?" he asked. "Well, they do have rooms with more than 2 beds," one of them began. "In fact, there are 4 bunks in ours." "That works, I suppose," he said noncommittally. "So who is the 4th?" "Don't really know who the other 2 are," came the reply. "The rooms were pre-assigned, and it seems you were not in our room." "Really?" he remarked and looked toward the desk. "I guess I shouldn't be surprised. It was only at the last minute that he elected to join the mission. In fact, they probably don't even have my name on the roster, and I'll likely as not end up in a broom closet, sharing my bunk with the local vermin." A short chorus of laughter followed, and he moved to the desk to get his own room assignment. As it turned out, his comment was not far from the truth. He was pinned to the bottom of the roster, and as luck would have it, there was an odd number of men in all, so he got his own room. He found the room at the end of the hall on the 2nd floor. It was set off into an alcove, as if it were originally intended to be a staff room, and the light in the alcove was burnt out. He might not have found it if he had not been counting room numbers as he progressed down the hall, as it was very dark at the end. Setting his pack on the bunk, he wondered if it might not have originally been a broom closet after all, as the room was only about 6 feet wide and 8 feet long. Just enough space for the bed against one wall, and a small desk with a lamp at the end of the formed walkway. No radio, television, or any other form of entertainment other than a small window above the desk at the end of the room. He looked out the window at the blowing snow. Apparently, the room was built as a dormer on the roof, as he could see the eaves of the roof to the sides match the ends of the room. Just below the window, the roof sloped away to the eave, and there seemed to be a work ladder bolted to the tiles. He smiled to himself. Just another shithole in a world of shitholes. He had been here before, and there would undoubtedly be others. He changed his shirt and went to join his companions at dinner. The sound of gunfire woke him with a start, and he rolled from the bunk with his pistol in one hand and the other hand working furiously to pull his boots on. He was not worried about tying them, as he kept his eyes trained on the door, listening to the sounds out in the hall. Several men yelled, and he could hear someone giving directions in a foreign language in between bursts of automatic weapons fire. The voices seemed to be down the hallway away from his door, so he took advantage of the moment to quickly tie his boots and finish getting dressed. Moving several magazines for the pistol to his pockets, he strapped on the backup knife and slung the pack over his shoulders. There would be no carrying it by the strap now, as he was in a hostile situation and needed both hands free to deal with it. He looked quickly around the room to make sure he had everything, and threw a glance at the window. It was still dark outside. He peered through the eye-hole of the door, and seeing no one in the foyer, quietly opened the door and stepped out. The door was left open to keep sounds down and ensure his retreat would not be hampered if necessary. He could see the shadow of a single man who seemed to be standing guard at the end of the hall, as a darker outline on the already dark wall, and moved forward to look around the corner. The guard was only a couple steps away, clothed in jungle fatigues with broad-leaf patterns. He held an AK-47 at the ready, but seemed wholly disinterested and unfazed by what was happening, as if it was just another day. In the close quarters of the hall, he reeked of sweat and wood smoke. A shout of surprise erupted as another man in jungle fatigues was thrown into the hallway. He was followed quickly by one of his friends from the bus, who dove through the doorway with a large knife in hand. The knife found its mark in the center of the invader's chest, and his friend looked up to see who was next, even as he reached for the invader's weapon. Several other men in the hall, seeing their comrade die at the hands of the enemy, turned their AKs on him in a burst of full automatic fire before he could raise the newfound weapon. As he went down in a hail of bullets, their eyes met momentarily, and he saw a smile of defiance on his companion's face. The elderly black man who told them to check their weapons was standing at the opposite end of the hall, with another who seemed to be in charge of the invading force. They were arguing, but it was clear that the elderly man had at least an equal, if not higher rank than the other. He was supposed to be an ally. He considered the situation, weighing his options. It would be a simple matter to overtake the guard and use his weapon against the half a dozen men in the hallway, but there were sure to be others he could not see in the other rooms. In order to take out more than 24 men who accompanied him, there would have to have been enough invaders to cover every room simultaneously. How he had been overlooked was beyond him. There was nothing he could do for the others in the face of such odds, if any of them still survived. But that did not mean he couldn't take the fight to the enemy. Moving quietly back to the room, he closed and locked the door and made his way to the window. He cast a glance at the bed as he stepped onto the desk, and realized that even though he slept, he had not rolled down the blankets, and the bed looked unused. That was good, as it might give him the element of surprise. He opened the window, bracing himself against the cold, and stepped out onto the roof. The eave of the dormer gave enough protection from the elements that there was no snow near the wall, giving him sure footing. He pulled the window closed and eased over to the ladder to make his way down in the darkness. The inn was built in the old colonial style, with many ornamental wood pieces and columns, which made his descent easier. Standing near the entrance to the inn, between a large bush and the wall, he could see only one man guarding the doors. He pulled his knife and kept it ready as he climbed over the end of the balcony, keeping to the shadows. He moved silently forward and took the guard from behind, plunging his knife into the top of the shoulder to sever the subclavian artery, while covering his mouth and nose with the other hand to keep him quiet. When there was no more resistance, he quietly laid the guard to the side of the door. Removing an ammo pouch from the enemy's belt, which held extra magazines for the AK-47, he clipped it onto his own belt and peered around the corner into the inn. There was no one else visible in the lobby. Moving quietly, he quickly made his way behind the counter in front of the arms room. The door was still standing open, as if it did not matter. Stepping in, he was confronted with an array of weaponry, not only from his own group, but of others as well. This was not the first time this had happened. Amidst the stacks of abandoned weapons, his own rifle seemed to call to him, and there next to it, his primary knife. It was out of the sheath, as if someone had been admiring it, and forgot to put it back in. He quickly stuffed it into his pack and traded the AK for his own familiar weapon, an AR-10 with reflexive sight. Dropping the AK magazines, he grabbed several full mags from the pack of one of his now-dead companions and placed them in the ammo pouch. Unsure of what he might encounter or when he would find an ally, he grabbed yet another pack containing the same ammunition and supplies as his own and shouldered it. Each man had 3 days of water and rations in addition to first aid and other field items. When he was ready, he pulled the bolt on his weapon to chamber around and stepped from the armory. The invading force seemed to be confident of their efforts as they were proceeding en masse toward him down the stairs. Their smiles and laughter faded quickly as they were interrupted by the spray of automatic fire from his own weapon. Several tried to jump to the side, only to be cut down in flight as he raked them with bullets. When the movement ceased, so did the bullets. Crouched on the stairs behind several corpses, the elderly black man looked at him pleadingly. He could only let the anger and disgust pierce the man's soul through his eyes as he raised the weapon to drive a single word into his forehead with a well-placed bullet. Traitor. A sharp blow knocked him back against the wall as the sound of a gunshot reached his ears, and he felt the bullet go deep into his shoulder. Turning his weapon toward the report, he saw the man he had elected not to kill standing at the top of the stairs. His weapon barked a response before the man even realized he had not killed his quarry, and he tumbled to join his comrades. Stuffing a field dressing into the sleeve of his shirt from the neck, he made his way up the stairs to check on his companions. If there were any alive, they would need each other now. He made his way from the inn to get to the pickup zone. He was one of several infiltration parties which had distinct objectives, but he could not complete the mission without the others in his team. As he made his way out, he could not understand how the enemy kept fighting him until he was forced to use his primary knife, and then he realized the blade was loose. As he washed the sand from the blade and hilt in a puddle to examine it, the blade came out in his hand along with a small microchip, a transmitter which had been placed in the hilt, preventing the blade from seating fully. That's why his knife was out of the sheath in the arms room. Looking at the torn-up ground around him, he sees the bits of familiar pink markers used to simulate the flagging of logging in order to mark for those who follow inconspicuously. Going to the markers in the soil, he had a flash of déjà vu as he finds the marker beacon he seeks and realizes he has been here before. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll be sure to join the conversation. That's all for now, but I'll be back again. with another story just for you. Until then, sleep well.